Okay, so this is a pretty interesting story, a little bit of intrigue, and it may sound incredulous, but it's actually a really true story. So there was a certain gentleman, young gentleman. At that time, he would have been going to school, I think, in the SAS. Actually, I know, in the SAS school out in St. Andrews, out in Grenville. And he was part of, the militia and stuff like that. And one thing that was relatively regular occurrence was roadblocks, as far as I remember. I mean, it seems like ever so often you'll have a roadblock popping up. And seeing that there was so much activity, or what the PRG would have called back then counter-revolutionary activity in the north of the island, there have been a couple of roadblocks all over the place. So this gentleman who was going to SAS, secondary school, high school, was actually part of the militia and was actually part of a roadblock one night. And you can't make this stuff up. And in the roadblock, he actually had to search a car which his principal was actually traveling in. And of course, the procedure. You have to get out of the car, you have to search the persons in the car, and you have to search the car. So apparently, his principal did not take that lightly and was none too happy about being searched by one of his students. So the principal was adamant that he is not going to have this young man in a school where he's principal who searched him. And of course, in situations like that, you really can't challenge that, right? It's just going to be an uproar in the community. So what happened, that gentleman now actually had to leave school and then became a permanent part of the detachment that was actually at Pearls Airport, the Pearls Camp. Yeah. So that is how, it is reported that gentleman, young gentleman, would have been like 15 or so, was actually on Pearls Airport during the invasion, October 25th, 1983. Apparently, he would have been part of some security element for the anti-aircraft gunners and loaders. I mean, you have to understand, you can't be loading and firing and then worrying about some infantry coming up and popping up behind you, right? So there's always a security element for, the anti-aircraft or artillery and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, so that's how that young man at that age ended up on Pearls Airport on October 25th, 1983. Crazy. Put himself on the line and put his life on the line. That's why it gets me upset when some of these guys come and talk a set of nonsense. Some of these imposters come and talk a set of nonsense. Never fired a shot in jest. Okay? And there it was, these young men were putting their life on the line. Unfortunately, they had drank the Kool-Aid and they had believed in the cause of the revolution, and they were totally misled, by a totally self-serving leadership. That is why I am alarmed and concerned that some of these players are still here trying to deceive the youth of Grenada with a bunch of sensationalism and nonsense. And to divert a little, yes, indeed, there was actually a jihad in Grenada. Very interesting. I know when you think of jihad, you think of somewhere in the Middle East, or you think of, something like that, or somewhere far away. But there actually was in Grenada. I told you there was a lot of interesting, crazy things happening in that very short period of time. There's a lot of people competing, for power. So apparently the Muslim guys from the north was having none of it. And depending on who you listen to, some will tell you that they actually gave the PRA a run for their money. It was difficult to try to track them down, but eventually they were able to neutralize the threat in that particular area, and some sort of calm descended after that. But it was a very, very, very interesting time. There was a lot of intrigue and there was a lot of things taking place. I mean, there's a very tragic story that, some people may know about, where there were a certain gentlemen who were actually just workers, at Pearls Airport. And apparently, they were brothers and they were all on their way home, And for some reason, there's a lot of conspiracy theories and there's a lot of theories about what happened. And I don't think anybody really knows for sure. But one of the theories that are floating around is that particular night, there was some sort of, activity in the area where the PRA might have been looking for these same guys I told you about who was actually waging some sort of jihad against them. And they were trying to evade them. But all that is known is that these gentlemen, their car was shot up and they lost their lives, right? And again, there's a lot of speculation about who did what. But one thing is clear is that particular night, it seems like there was some sort of activity where, between these guys who were waging a jihad against the PRG government and the PRA. So there was some sort of interaction, they were kind of tracking each other. But unfortunately, that night, these gentlemen who seemingly, based on all reports, absolutely had nothing to do with the situation. All right? And they ended up losing their life. I think it was 3 brothers altogether. And it was just a crazy, crazy, crazy time and a crazy thing and a very tragic thing. And to this day, nobody really knows what happened. There's, a bunch of speculation. And of course, it's only the people who were present would have known exactly what happened. But one thing was for sure. The very next day, the PRG at the time made sure that they used and took full advantage of the propagandist effect of what happened, saying that counter-revolutionaries struck again. You know what I'm saying? So in that sense, the propagandist effect was actually in their favor. So they used that, But again, no one knows exactly what happened that night, of course, except the people who were there. Yeah, so that was some of the things that were happening, around that time. It's crazy. At that time, I would have been living in Grenville, a little further, away from that stuff. But probably Hudson George can chime in, he's from that particular area. He might know a little more about the stories. But yeah, I was living on Gladstone Road, La Bay, as they would say. You know what I'm saying? Having a good time, just, living good, And it's interesting, my first revolutionary flag I actually held in hand was on Gladstone Road. You know what I'm saying? I could never forget. The flag, it was a red circle with a white background. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that would have been, right after 79, And yeah, to me, it seems like there was a sort of jubilee in the air. Like there's a sort of excitement, a sort of, anticipation of probably great things to come. Nobody knew that things would have went south, but you could have feel that kind of vibe, like a good vibe at first. You just feel it in the air. Everybody's kind of excited and upbeat. That's what I felt. That's my sensation I can remember. So that story and these things happened during the PRG. And now we're gonna head back a little south in St. George's area, and this happened around post October 25th when things really kind of calmed down. Pretty much there wasn't much activity in terms of war or invasion or anything like that. And this just has to do with looting. You know what I'm saying? I think they raided Food Fair, knocked that out. By the time I got there, was nothing there. You know what I'm saying? Then so me and my friends, we kind of walked over to, there was a major store, distributors, Brighton and Miners, out at Lagoon Road. Let me see how I can explain that. A little bit after Ace Hardware, there's a street that goes up and cuts to get into Belmont or Paddock area. Well, I was right at the corner, actually, at the bottom of that street, right at the corner. There was a Brighton and Miners, big distributors, at that time. And boy, oh boy, the looters ravaged that place. Seriously ravaged that place. So these are some of the things that happen in times of war and times of societal distress and stuff like that. But by the time we got there, as I said, we didn't get anything. All we saw was, a bunch of Milo on the ground and, and stuff like that all over the place. So we didn't get anything. We were too late at that time. But yeah, this is some of the things that happened. You know what I'm saying? So I hope you enjoy these stories. And again, as I said, I would be giving you a little bit of stories here and there of things that I personally experienced, and some of it, things that were related to me by others. So when you see a lot of people, come forth and pretend to be the hardest socialists, Marxists, and most radical, you should ask them. Don't be afraid. Go and ask them. Said, if you were such socialist Marxists and so radical, did you stand up and fired one shot in defense of your country? Ask them. Did you? Or was it young men who only had 2 weeks of training? Okay? And of course, I did speak about, the lieutenant that had some guts. But, ask them. Who put their asses on the line to defend their country? And of course, they were misguided. So, I just don't want you to be deceived. You know what I'm saying? I just don't want you to be deceived. And I generally have respect for all soldiers all over the world, especially when they try to serve honorably. So a lot of these young men didn't have a choice, okay? And they were sacrificed on both sides, United States and Grenadian soldiers. So I generally, and it's so interesting that if you hear people who actually, U.S. soldiers who actually served in Grenada, they show more love and respect for Grenadian soldiers and for the courage they showed. Because soldiers always respect soldiers. You see what I'm saying? They understand what it's all about. You know what I'm saying? And you have these people there who are making a mockery, really, of the sacrifice that young men would have, given their life for, and talking a set of nonsense. Oh, that's heartbreaking to me. You see what I'm saying? One thing is clear, and one thing should be kept in mind, that subsequent to all this turmoil, that it was indeed, and that's a fact, indisputable fact, that a re-emergence and re-entrance into democracy and some semblance of peace and stability was only guaranteed by a war, by the 25th 1983 invasion. All of that sacrifice had to be made to guarantee that semblance of peace and stability that we enjoyed subsequent to all of that turmoil and chaos. So that is something that should be kept in mind. In diesem Sinne, gute Nacht. On that note, good night.